not going to be talking about aging today. We're going to be talking about the living. And we are experts for a number of reasons. Annie not only took care of her parents as they were going through their aging and final years of life. She amazingly walks the talk. Annie also is a very well-known person in Australia and overseas in innovation. She's an innovation trainer, coach, founder, and to top that all off, she's been involved in both government at all three levels and in aging and longevity. She's set up, thank you. I must be shrinking in my old age. I haven't had to be taped up yet. So Annie also established the first whole of government aging strategy that still exists today, and some of the things that she was working on for the Minister for Aging in 2008 are still current. I have a very different claim to fame in that I've been involved in health and aging for more decades than I care to admit. But I have been at all levels, from a researcher to a university lecturer to a board director. And like Annie, I also have the lived experience. And that experience was watching my mother age and finally pass a year ago at the age of 109. Yes. So, no, you might say that I'm doing this out of desperation, but I will say that if anybody tells me that I should plan my financial longevity based on the average, I can't. It's what I'm going to say is not printable. Okay, so that's what we do, who we are. I want to tell you more about what we're going to be doing today. We really value your time. We value the expertise that's in this room. I want to convene by welcoming you here. We are guests on the land of the Gadigal people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We're going to start with just an overview. Longevity, what is it? Talk about the longevity ecosystem. And then we're honored to have the futurist Mark Pesce talking to us about longevity opportunities. And Mark is well known internationally as well as in Australia and keeps his eye on the horizon and beyond the horizon. And last time we were lucky enough to have Mark in this room, and in fact, he was exceptionally well received, and somebody here actually mentioned that they are familiar with his book and have recommended to a number of people. Anne-Marie Elias is going to talk about how we need to reframe longevity. Then we're going to go through a little bit about how we can help you in your organizations. We're going to end up with 30 minutes of networking, and we will ask you to please give us feedback. We do this from time to time. We set the bar very high. As I said, we have very high value on the value of your time in this room. You have lots of other things you could be doing. When you're networking, please take advantage of the variety of people who are in this room that range from experts, service providers, scholars, researchers, investors. It's a very exciting audience. Thank you, Annie. So what is longevity? Well, interestingly, we all think about longevity as living longer, but it doesn't actually mean that. It just means your lifespan. But in fact, what's happening is that people are living longer and longer with a bit of a hiccup during the COVID pandemic, particularly in places like Italy and the United States. The averages, which I referred to earlier, for someone born today, so not someone in this room, but someone born today, are 81 for men and for women 85. However, if you get to the age of 65, you have a much higher probability of living longer. And so for men, that reaches 85. And for women, it's meant to be 88. But I've seen other statistics that say that the median is closer to 90, and that you have almost a 50% chance of living a lot longer, including to 100, hence the reason for a book that was written a number of years ago called The 100-Year Life. The other thing that we have seen some of and we need to have a lot more of is health span versus lifespan. And I'm not going to elaborate more on that and leave it to Mark. But the upshot of this and other drivers is that we have a growing population of seniors, people 65 and older, and that makes up a growing group of consumers, innovators, workers, and we have to stop thinking about this group of people with a stereotype of frail, halt, lame, living in a assisted living or residential aged care, meaning nursing home. This is a very, very vibrant group of people and economy. So I want to talk a little bit about the dynamics underlying aging. And the reason for this graph is in particular for those of you who are already in or thinking of being in the business of longevity or planning on investing in it. It's very rare that you see an opportunity which has at least a 20-year roadmap. And that's what we're talking about here. There is not only a lot of opportunity now, but there will be a lot of growth in opportunity over the next 20 years. In Australia itself, the longevity economy is exploding, and the figures in the United States are even more impressive. The other thing to be aware of is that this turning point that I mentioned is actually only a few years from now. It's 2030, when Australia is going to have as many or more people aged 65 and older as 18 and younger. I also want to get people to focus on the fact that if it's 20 years, then the upcoming cohorts are people who today are 45 and older. So we really can't talk about longevity without thinking about who's coming up behind. And that's why in everything that we do, we talk about the 45s and older. The economy, the longevity economy, according to the expert who wrote the book, The Longevity Economy, Joseph Coughlin, who runs the Age Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I bet nobody knew that's what MIT stands for. Coughlin wrote the book, The Longevity Economy, in 2017, and I highly recommend it to you because obviously it's an entire book-length tour of the topic that we're talking about today. AARP stands for the American Association of Retired Persons. Anybody 50 or older can belong to that organization, and they have about 50 million members. It's a very powerful, well-cashed up organization, and they run their own innovation lab. And I think some people will be at CES this year. Mark and I certainly will be there, and there are 2 days of age tech or silver tech innovation startups and pitching at the annual CES. It's a very, very big market. AARP has been extremely active and identifies that the population of people 50 and older are 34% of the global GDP, but as you can read for yourself, of Australia's wealth, people 45 and older hold 78%. Now, you've probably been reading recently about a two-track economy referring to people who are older and people who are younger, and we are starting to see that a lot. I think, unfortunately, for the hospitality industry in Australia, we're seeing that people who are a little bit older have enough saved up, invested, so that they can continue to enjoy the wonderful hospitality industry. Whereas people who are younger or raising families at the early stages are purchasing more and more either ready meals or do-it-yourself cooking at home. So just need to be aware of this two-track economy and where longevity fits. it will be very difficult for you where you're sitting to read the detail on this map. The important thing is to know that the whole concept of longevity and the milestones along the way have recently been reinvented and redesigned and formally adopted. This is from the Stanford Center on Longevity. And it's worthwhile getting a hold of this new map of life, again, because it has in it milestones that you need to be aware of, may not be in front of mind. And just this month, the same center at Stanford came out with a different map. It looks the same, but it's actually the financial map of life. And while some of you in your day jobs will sort of be aware of people going through these milestones, I think it's really helpful to have this at your fingertips. So, it's deliberate that you can't read it. And the reason for that is to just show you what happens if you try to put on a single page the global longevity ecosystem. It's a real thing. It is huge, and so are the opportunities. The Australian longevity economy ecosystem, there have been some attempts to map it, but they're not complete. It's something that we're working on at the moment, but we shouldn't be thinking just locally. We should also be thinking globally about that opportunity. And just to imagine, over 1,000 R&D centers which have silver tech or longevity innovation going on. The idea of a longevity economy isn't just MIT or us. The International Longevity Centre in the UK has outposts in about 20 countries in the world that are actively working on research which maybe in a prior generation would have been called aging, but they're increasingly looking at aspects of longevity. In January, the World Economic Forum officially christened the longevity economy only about 7 years after the book came out, but as you probably know, the World Economic Forum depends on having consensus or at least agreement amongst a number of powerful people. And finally, as I mentioned, the Stanford Center. There's also a Milstein. I don't know if many of you are aware that part of the penance that Milstein paid was to start in California a center on longevity. Yeah, Mark, that's true. I'm older than you are, so I know about that scandal. I'm going to turn over at the moment to Mark Pesce, and I'm going to ask Annie to do an intro to Mark, who will talk about Australia's longevity opportunities.
We are so lucky to have Mark Pesce turn his attention to this. He is a futurist, he is super well known in Australia and overseas, and my excitement in life now is Mark sending me articles about longevity via text. I've hit the limits of my life. But he also speaks quite a lot at conferences for the financial sector to talk about this issue. So we're very lucky because he's just hot off the heels of a FIAL conference where he presented recently. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you. So first off, props to Abby and Annie, because I didn't really know that much about what was going on with this economy, with the longevity economy, until I got pulled in to be on a panel here that they had back in October. And that started a journey. And what I've learned was exciting and terrifying, as you'll soon find out. I'll show you while we're setting this up. While I was preparing a talk for the Funds Executives Association, all right, that's basically the CEOs of all of the industry super funds. And I gave this talk on August 1st. There were $2 trillion of capital in management in the room that day. And I'm going to explain some of what I shared with them. But the thing I started off with was this image, which I'd captured from the New York Times, just the obit. This is just their normal random set of 3 obits for that day, sort of toward the end of July. And you see the youngest person on that list is 99. Right? And has that happened before? Probably. Is it going to happen a lot more? almost definitely. And this gets to be what we're starting to see. This is what the present looks like, because in fact the change is already happening. Now, I'm going to get personal for a second, because when we talk about aging, it's both personal and cultural. It's happening at both levels at the same time. But I'm going to show you the last 3 generations of the Pesces. So we start off with my grandfather. My grandfather made it to age 63, which at the time he died in 1971 wasn't particularly out of range for men at that period of time. And then my dad, who died in 2019, made it to 79. Now, as Abby pointed out, if you are well when you're 65, you stand a relatively good chance of making it to 90. Like, better than 50%. Probably a lot better, but we really don't know what the odds are here. And so I'm looking at this going, all right, I'm 61. If I can hold things together for 3 years, I'll get the brass ring, and I'll be good to go until age 90. And in a lot of ways, that's probably how we should be setting our expectations for how we should be behaving as individuals, but also how we should be behaving as a culture. And this brings us to the first thing that I want to point out. There are 3 major opportunities I'll bring up here. The first one is this. What do we need to do to keep Australians well to age 65? There are a lot of reasons. First off, it is a lot cheaper to keep someone well than it is if they're sick, even if they don't live as long, all right? But also those people are going to be happier and more contributing and just better parts of the culture. Now, how do we keep people well to 65? Well, half of this is clearly a public health thing, right? This is why we discourage people from smoking. It's why we want people to drink less if they can. It's why we want people to do physical exercising, go see the GP regularly. We all know these public health messages, and these public health messages are working because life is getting longer for most people. But there are probably a whole bunch of other things that we can think about, both as a culture and as individuals making choices in that culture about how to manage our wellness leading up to 65. And this is where there's an opportunity, because we don't really think in these terms. We think, oh, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Well, it's like, actually, wait a minute. The whole story here is that we're doing it for ourselves and for our families and for our culture. How can we build not just the social infrastructure, but the commercial infrastructure that can reinforce that? This is the way we might want to be thinking if we get to a place where we want to keep people well to 65. All right, now, some charts. So let's say that people are going to live on average to about 90, because they're going to make it to 65 and be well. And it's going to be a little bit longer for women and a little bit less for men. Then there's this thing called health span. And health span is basically how long out of that period of time you're well, right? You have basically your full complement of agency and can do things. And for most people, on average, that runs to about 85. All right? By around the time they're 85, something has happened that starts to affect their agency. For instance, I don't know if you saw on the news, Maggie Beer had a fall last week, broke bones, all right? And we capitalized that. She had a fall because what you can tell with people aging is when they have that first fall, tells you it's a significant indicator of the rest of their lives, all right? So what do we want to do here? What we want to do is we want to identify the gap in a health span and a lifespan, and then throw everything at it that we can to make that gap as short as possible. So, this is why I wanted a microphone, but whatever. That gap right there between health span and lifespan, which will be different from person to person, but it represents the primary opportunity in the longevity economy, because being sick sucks, and it's also really expensive, all right? And so if we're going to have more people who are living to their full lifespans of 90, it makes sense for us to build an ecosystem of services and a cultural infrastructure that does its best to extend individual health spans for as long as possible. Now, We don't need to magic things up from the void, although we did discover just this week, because the cardiologists in England published it, that Ozempic, the wonder drug for losing weight, decreases all deaths. Yes, I know, there's a mic drop after that. So I think probably we're all going to be on Ozempic or something similar, semaglutide inhibitor. They don't know exactly why yet, but they know that it's good, all right? And so we have all of these other medicines that actually already exist that will be coming along, but we have to think now about what does it really take to get people to extend their health span? I can hear that. Excellent. There's 3 key elements that have been identified. First of these is that we need to stay as active as we can for as long as we can. And activity means getting out there and walking, but it also means maintaining your balance. The more we get into this, the more we understand that balance is significantly important to maintaining wellness for as long as possible. But you need to be active. You also need to be connected. You need to be with and around other people. A lot of things then mean that people need hearing aids, because in fact cognitive decline is directly correlated to how much language you hear, because there's something about language that keeps our brains going, as you might expect. So there's a whole bunch of things that are around that, but building networks of connected people and let people feel valued and contributing. All right? None of this is weird, but now I'm going to show you 3 images, and I think this whole room is going to giggle, because I'm going to show you 3 images of what that actually looks like in practice. And you won't have ever seen this in this light before. But I'm going to show you 3 people who made it to their late 90s, or in one case, over 100. Oh, wait, I go one more slide first. All right. Sorry. The second of the longevity opportunities is, what do we need to build in terms of both social infrastructure and in terms of capital infrastructure, businesses, services, to keep Australians active and connected and contributing? What are all of the things? It's funny, because I was at a startup event, I think this year, was talking to someone who's building a network of people who just wanted to go on bike rides together, so they could just message each other, they could go on bike rides. How many things like that should we have to keep people connected and active and contributing? And that wasn't particularly for people who are elderly, it was just for people. But we need to now start to think about, what are all of those potential services, products, ways to connect, to stay active, connected, and contributing. Now there's the 3 people I was talking about. I don't know if you recognize any of them. So here's the thing. The Queen Mother worked until she was about 99. Now, her father lived to 88, so she had reasonably good genes, and the Queen inherited half of those, but the Windsor genes are horrible, right? And Philip, no other Mountbatten had ever lived anywhere near as long as Philip did. He made it to 99. Why? Because they had something to do every day when they got out of bed. They were needed. They couldn't just sort of fade away. They actually had to do it. And it turns out that that is not a bad pattern for your life. Now, none of us are royalty. None of us have the resources of royalty, but that doesn't mean we can't be so integrated, connected, and active and contributing that we have the same burden of responsibility in our lives that helps us thrive for as long as we can. All right. But as I said, we're not all monarchs. And, they had access to resources that we don't have. But I want to point out, the Queen Mother lived half her life before antibiotics had been invented. All right? She was well known for being down with influenza or with pneumonia all of the time back in the 20s and 30s, because people got that all of the time. All right. So we've got our lifespan, that 90-year lifespan. Now we come to the thin end of the wedge, because I'm going to introduce a new term, the fin span. The fin span is how long you can live comfortably. And you see that gap there? So let me tell you a little story. So again, I prepared this talk for FEAL, for the Financial Executives Association. And I said, that gap is going to see people fall into it. and they're going to disappear without a trace. And the more that I work with these two, the more I am conscious of the danger of that gap. And I told every one of the CEOs in that room that although you will not be responsible for the existence of this gap, you will be blamed for it. Because we have seen our superannuation system as the solution to that specific problem. The problem is superannuation is a one-size-fits-all solution to a culture that is very much not one-size-fits-all. So let me present the second gap. The gap between fin span and lifespan. And this is another primary opportunity in the longevity economy. At the first round table that Prime Life Partners had, which focused on financial security, you could see every superannuation company in the room trying to get their heads around the fact that people had all this money, which, by the way, they don't want you to withdraw, but they know you're going to. It's the way it is. But they didn't have any plan for how you could withdraw that money wisely. That was all on you as an individual. And frankly, none of us are that smart, because there is no structure to support that wise allocation of resources between fin span and lifespan. And so this is an enormous area. And I think in terms of where the longevity economy ecosystem is going, this is where the money is going to get made. It doesn't look like financial advice as we've known it. It doesn't look like home care as we've known it. It's something new. It's something that's going to be quite specific to an individual's life plan. And again, for the 45-year-olds, it's going to be part of their journey as soon as possible. For people like me, as soon as we can generate this, I'll have this along for the ride, constantly working with me so that my fin span meets my lifespan. Because we're going to run into all sorts of problems here. The first problem, can I talk about the 2030 rent problem? So the first problem we're going to have, there are about 30% of over 55s rent. Half of those will be unable to afford rent in 2030. So you're talking about a homeless population of seniors, what, 500,000? 400,000 homeless seniors. That is baked into the numbers right now because of this gap. So this is the third longevity economy opportunity, all right? We have to work on developing both the social infrastructure and the economic infrastructure, the products and services that will grow fin spans to meet our lifespans. Otherwise, you're going to have a growing mass of an aging population who will be, in some sense, out on the street. We don't want that. A, it's expensive, and B, it's just going to be ugly. All right, what does life look like by 2050? Now that we're all living 90 years, we actually get to plan our lives a little bit differently. And so there's basically three general patterns of life. The first 30 years or thereabouts, and none of this is set in stone, is your learning phase. You're learning about relationships, you're learning about economics, you're learning about society. And then, and it will be true broadly for most of the people in the room, those next 30 years are your earning phase. These are the years you're going to be putting your career into place, your money aside for that last period of life, and building the networks that will be supporting you through that entire period. And then finally, and this is the phase transition, which we don't really make right now, because basically people retire at 57 and then what happens? Who knows? And people do, by the way, on average retire at 57 in Australia. Then we enter into the returning phase, where people are taking their skills and they're facilitating, they're guiding, they're exemplifying. And of course, we'll go back and forth between all of these, but these are the larger class stages of our lives as we hit the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s. Now, this raises some questions. You know that Joe Biden decided not to run last week. I personally, and I'm just going to make a statement here, wish Clover had made the same decision. I love Clover, but 20 years is more than enough. And so we need to start to think about how to modulate the fact that people who are living longer and have gotten to the top will need to find a way to ease themselves away from the levers of power that they've spent an entire lifetime getting to, so that organizations have the capacity to renew. That is a social question. We need to build that. If we can build a term of life for them which makes them vital as contributors, then it won't feel like so much of a loss to them. So this is part of just what we need to think about as we manage this transition, because that's already happening. We can see that. The whole Biden thing this year is that writ large. And the last thing I need to say is, this is already happening. And this is a lovely quote from William Gibson: the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Your mum is an example of that, all right? We already know, because many people in this room will absolutely live past 90, so we need to start thinking in these terms. We need to start thinking about lifespan and health span and how to make those as close as possible. We need to think about lifespan and fin span and bring those up to equity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. So what we're really about now is about reframing longevity and starting at 45 and up. That has become so clear through the work that we've been doing. We're living longer, healthier lives, contributing as workers and also as carers and customers and consumers. That shift absolutely needs to happen. Where Prime Life Partners sits is we've been working on 4 pillars of longevity, of an ecosystem. The first is financial security. It's the fundamental. If we don't get that right, people are going to struggle. And I know Australia, everyone will, oh, but Australia's so lucky you've got compulsory super. Compulsory super doesn't work for freelancers. It doesn't work for gig economy or a casualised workforce. It doesn't work for women who have taken lots of time out of the workforce to have children, for example. So that has to be the core. The next one is affordable, accessible housing in the community. Over 90% of people are living in their homes. I have never understood the beat up, and I am going to call it a beat up, of aged care. Less than 10% since 2010 have gone into aged care at any point in time. And yet we've been told, oh, put your hand up if you're a boomer. Well, we've got news now. Apparently you're going to be a user pays. And those of you who've ever heard me talk will remember my parents, who passed away a few years ago, paid a $1.2 million bond and a daily fee because they were self-funded retirees. My ex-in-laws went in last week, $1.7 million and a daily fee. So I want you to really think about, what is this situation that you're going to have to pay like no one's ever paid before? We've all been paying. Trust me on that. The next one is care and support. And that's just not for the people. It's for the people who are caring for their parents, their husbands, their wives, their children. The carer demographic is 45 and over, and sometimes a lot younger. But we are moving into a place now where it is acknowledged, the government's now investing in home care, because that's where people are going. So they could have kept beating up aged care till the cows come home. People go in for the last 4 years of their life. I experienced it with my parents. It was horrific. Both of my parents had an Order of Australian Merit for their service to community, and they sat in their nappies all day after paying a $1.2 million bond. This is unacceptable. I have no parents left, but if I can change things for other people, that's why I personally exist now. Finally, consumers. We need to start not thinking of older people as pensioners and patients, but as consumers. They are spending money, they are caring for people, they are active in the community. My dad's request at 93 when he went into a nursing home was to get his laptop, right? He was my stepfather actually, and he did the dual pension agreements in 1993 with Brian Howe. That's why all the Italian migrants get super from their country. Because in 93, he saw that Australia was going to be in trouble because of the number of migrants, including ourselves. So where was the money going to come from? Well, he went and took 600 Italians to at Canberra and didn't move until Brian Howe came out and spoke to him. What's the problem, Livia? And every person told their story about, I worked in Italy for 10, 20, 15 years. So since 93, Italy was the first where we had dual pension agreements, and all the other countries followed. So let's thank my stepdad, who passed away in 2020, Livio Benedetti, for his work. But where he ended up in a nursing home, it was horrific. So our signal to put them in a nursing home was 32 hospitalisations in 1 year, and incontinence. So it got to a point where there really wasn't. But the other thing I want you to understand, because people say, oh yeah, but there's 30% of older people that don't use technology. That's shrinking rapidly, and my parents used the technology because they were in the workforce, and we set up a Google Home in Italian that kept them at home for an extra 2 years, because it woke them up, it reminded them of appointments in their language. And I think I've told this story before, but I love it. My mum fell in love with the guy because he would say, "Buongiorno Teresa." And she would say, "Ma dov'è? Dov'è questo uomo? Io voglio vedere questo uomo. I want to see this man." And it's like, there is no man, Mama. But I love that she thought he was real because of how sexy he was. So, you know, we did that, and then there came another problem. They both had macular degeneration, so they could not answer the phone. So I still don't know how I did that. Any tech person can please come up and remind me how I did that. Is I set up an iPad at home and did automatic answer on FaceTime. So it was a bit comedic because it would be, dove sei? And we'd be, "Mama, iPad, vieni al iPad." And it would take half an hour, but we could speak to them. Especially when they went into care, it meant that we didn't have to wait for 5 hours for them to say, "Oh, we're busy, we'll call you back," and they never did. We had the iPad set up, we could see Mum, she could see us. So think about that. We bought that technology for my parents. They wouldn't have known to do it themselves. But now that I'm close to this gentleman who is an accountant who has vascular dementia, you know, we've set up his phone on Find My iPhone. I'm trying to convince the family to get him like a digital watch because sometimes he leaves his iPhone. That guy walks 20,000 steps a day and more. They were about to, you know, consider putting him in a nursing home until they realised the bond and the fact that he wasn't going to be able to just go out and go and have a coffee with people and things. That's not what a nursing home is. So we really need to see them as consumers. And the 2 lines at the bottom is something that is a whole of life course. We are now looking at this, we can't just go, "Oh, you're 45, now we're going to talk to you." This is an intergenerational issue, and it is a transitional period throughout your whole life course to reevaluate what's going to happen, and the education and tools to support you. This is one of my favourite slides. I do this stuff myself because I just get so excited. The 45 and up are a very powerful, powerful group. And I don't think the politicians have woken up to this yet. But this is significant. Over 45s make up 52% of voters in Australia. That was at the 2021 census. So you do the math, right? We have more people over 65 than under 18, but this cohort is huge. And why 45 and up? Because I was 45 when I started having that pinch of having kids at home and needing to be there for my parents more than just every now and then. Retirement intentions. So people intend to retire at 67, but in fact, they retire much younger. And there's roughly about, or there were about, in 22-23, about 4.2 million retirees. The average age was 56.9. So what happens, and you'll see this on LinkedIn quite a lot, someone hits that 55 plus and they're not getting interviewed for jobs anymore. They get retrenched and they just can't seem to grip back into the market anymore. And that is really, really sad because the wealth of experience and corporate memory we have is actually quite enormous. But what I also wanted you to think about as we, you know, digress and decide that we hate migrants all over again. I am a migrant myself, child of migrants. In 2030, it's going to be quite interesting. 6 years, there's going to be 3,500 people retiring a week. And that's the boomers and X's. And I am retiring, let me tell you, in some sort of way. But that's 181,000 in that year alone. Are we prepared for this? Are your workforces prepared for this? It's 15,000 people a month. We need to start planning and thinking about that. Public sector in particular, it's an ageing and has been an ageing workforce. So we really do need to think about who is going to come in and take over. So they are customers and contributors. This is roughly, unless it's stated otherwise, it's about the 65 and up. So we've got 35% of 65 and over that are primary carers. We have an increasing number of renters, 18%, who are boomers. That's the people that if they don't sort their shit out in 6 years will end up being the 400,000 homeless in 2030 as defined by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. But we're also generation wealth. We have 5 times the net worth, the 45s and up, or the boomers, so that's not me, and a wealth transfer of 3.5 million happening in this generation. So what are they looking for? Everything: education, lifestyle products, travel, learning, absolutely everything. So this is our longevity economy, the way Abby and I are defining it. So they're the first 3: financial security, housing and care. And we've got some amazing super funds coming through. Gen Life is doing new types of annuities. Household Capital is looking at how you release the equity in your home if you've paid your home outright and need to leverage that. The Room Exchange is one of my favourite, actually. It is about matching people to live together. So my concern is that women over 55 are the fastest growing group of homeless. So I'm trying to get my 27-year-old daughter to move out so I can have a room available to an over 55 woman at reasonable rent if she ever leaves me. But that's really important, because one of the things that when you talk about housing, everyone's talking about building new housing. We're not going to have enough. We are not going to have enough by 2030. So we need innovation. And the Room Exchange is people like me putting my room on a platform and older people or young people or whatever saying, I need an affordable space. And I think there's lots of that in the future. Narara Eco Village, they came and spoke at our event last year. Narara Eco Village is an eco village of initially retirees that went and bought some land and subdivided and created a community. They thought it was going to be for retirees. Then their kids rang and said, we can't own a house in Sydney, we're moving in with you. So it's now an intergenerational community, which I also love. It's beautiful. But they also talk about all the problems and dramas with councils to get that set up. I'm not going to go into that. It's in between the home and the care, there is Akin. Akin has a robot called Pixie. That's this. Hey Pixie is technology for your home. It will help you decide what you need. It will provide critical data about how much you're drinking, how much you're eating. It's going to be an absolute winner in the NDIS and in the care space, where you've got the robotics or AI helping maintain things, and then the people can come in to actually do the cool stuff, take you out, do things that are actually really important. Home Instead, Like Family, platforms that have been around. I was a carer on Like Family after my mum died because I was looking for someone with dementia, vascular dementia, and I found this person. I'm not paid anymore, but I keep in touch with the family. I'm in a WhatsApp group, and we're very, very close. And, that to me is one of the failings of any system, is expecting that a system is going to support people solely. You need real friendships and real people. And I didn't want to get paid anymore, but I did want to still be a part of this man's life because of all the knowledge I had, caring for my mum through her final years. Then there's Conjure. Conjure, the founder is here, David Anstey, but this is like one of the best technologies I've seen in a long time to help people stay at home. So, you come out of hospital, you've had an incident, and you've got to wait about 6 to 12 months to get an OT to come and measure your house to decide whether you need grab rails. David's created a technology that is an app on your phone, and you will be able to do that for your neighbour, your parents, and then send that to an OT who can then do the designs. So, you know, it is so important that these things are happening to shorten the time that people can get access to things like home modifications. My parents paid for their home ones by themselves because they just couldn't wait. But people don't have the finances to do that, you know, and that's a real concern. Finally, there are some awesome consumer products, and what we need to start thinking of is the boomer consumers. And Leah Heiss, who's right in the middle, I love that. That is diabetics. It is like the old Vital Call, but it's made into jewellery. That is what we are heading towards. So super exciting, but there's also a number of products there. Maturius is helping older people get employment, so over 55 employment. Wise Employment is doing the same. Silver Sirens is this beautiful woman, Faith Agugu, who's bringing a network of women together to help them plan for their future. Retire on Purpose, Nick Friedman is, you know, pounding the pavement, talking to companies and their employees about preparing for their future. Road Scholar is a travel company. My Body Boost, amazing, really simple application to help you exercise for 3 minutes a day, looking at your mind, your body, and your connection. Then there's other apps and things there that we've put. The lady that doesn't look like she's got anything actually has a hearing aid on. So over-the-counter hearing aids are coming, and that is going to make it a lot easier for people like my generation and the boomers to be wearing things like that and not feel less than or feel that they have an issue. Meanwhile, around the world, now I love this. So Sibstar, it looks like a Westpac logo there and a MasterCard logo, but this is in the United States, and Sibstar is basically a credit card for people with dementia. What I don't want to see is us looking at products that were designed for a different market, i.e. people with an intellectual disability, and transferring that product to people with dementia. It is a different cohort. Like, I kept thinking of my friend Dimitri, who was an accountant for 60 years of his life. What am I going to do giving him something as if he doesn't understand money at all? It's offensive and it's not okay. We need to be really sensitive about who these people are, because it could be you and me in 10 years' time. So how do we want those products to look for us? The other one is, I don't know, looks like a Google Home setup, but I love the iPad there reminding me to inhale. I barely breathe, so that's a really good reminder, and that's the products of the future. We also just wanted to mention quickly the International Longevity Centre in the UK, because they are actually now running sessions talking about trade opportunities for longevity tech. So this is incredible. Abby, I'm going to let you take over now, so thank you very much, and this is the final paces of our presentation.
Thank you, Annie. I don't know, guys. I have to gin up my energy to never match Mark, but Annie. All right, look, well, we wanted to let you know that in that very big illegible circle, there are definable market segments, and we focus on those that are on the left-hand side. And there are meant to be people in the room who are also looking at longevity science, biomarkers. It's what I call, for simplicity, the biohacking definition of longevity. That's the remedy or solution for physiological longevity. At the moment, we're focusing on the left-hand side. We're delighted to meet afterwards, and we're going to have lots of time for networking anyone from any of those segments, because we've got mostly everything in the room. So, what are we doing in relation, what are we as Prime Life Partners doing in relation to the 4 pillars? We think that as a result of the high-level roundtables we've had, which are effectively large focus groups, the priorities that have emerged are as follows. The urgent need to update financial planning tools. Now, financial planning is a term that people understand, but I think you've seen that it's much broader than that. Because finance underpins a lot of the things that we've discussed. If you don't have enough money to own your own home, then basically, as somebody said, you're a year away from being homeless. Finance is really important in terms of care. Now, most of you probably don't do the work that I do on a day-to-day basis, monitoring on a day-to-day basis the cost, the out-of-pocket cost of care, and I'm talking about care that is not medical or nursing care, just the kind of care to help you prepare a meal, go for a walk, go to the doctor. We're talking about $55 to $71 an hour, and that's post-tax. If you go on the government site about My Age Care, they list the 4 different levels of care that people should have available to them outside of home. And I've mentioned earlier about the time lag in getting assessed for the first level. And the first level is a few hours a week. It's really not going to help you stay at home. And the waiting time for that is it's probably 6 months to 12 months. But when you look at the next 3 levels of care, so beyond a few hours a week, level 2 or 3 or 4 for people who are seriously impaired, they won't even tell you how long you're going to wait. They simply say it's going to be more than a year. So a not so funny joke is that by the time, and by the way, you have to start at the bottom, you can't skip levels. So if you deteriorate to level 4, but you're still waiting at level 1, you can only get level 2. So the really not funny joke is that you can die waiting by the time you get to level 4. So it's really important to understand the importance of finance for everything, and the importance of financial literacy and early planning. Because I had a chat with somebody in the room whose parents were trying to get a 25-year mortgage at age 50. No go. I think most people do not know that you actually, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, you actually cannot get a mortgage if your earning capacity does not meet the level that that bank requires to service that loan. The other thing is the difficulty of getting credit cards. So we urgently need new products, not just a credit or debit card for people with dementia, but all kinds of services, financial services for people over the age of 45. And he mentioned housing affordability and supply. We ran a roundtable with CEOs and board directors, again, about a large, effectively focus group, people who are responsible for financing Wesley Housing, the head of Uniting. Housing affordability supply, as you've heard, is an absolutely urgent priority. As Annie just said, we will not have enough through new construction. We need other solutions. Innovative housing models. We're really very, very primitive in the way we think about housing. Universal design, which means that anybody, regardless of their age or level of ability, can use it, is just not something that's common to common parlance, and the developers will tell you it raises the price to the point that they won't make their margins. But we need innovative housing models. Somebody suggested at an institute called the Blueprint Institute that we look at modular housing as a potential way of keeping prices down. Other companies are doing other things. So you may see that in what previously were camper parks or trailer parks, there's low-cost housing going up for people who probably can't afford to buy their own home, or with the land included, particularly in large cities like Sydney, but possibly can afford their house if they lease the land. I'm not sure that's a realistic solution, because most of those communities are not in a community. They're not actually located where people want or need to be. And that final point is really important. Allowing people to age within a community that actually speaks to them, makes eye contact with them, asks them, are you okay? Can I help you with that shopping cart? So aging in a community has a lot of meanings. It's not just about the built environment, it's what we do to make a community responsive to and supportive of older people. How can you work with us? This is really important. I mentioned that we do a number of things. We've run 2. We're about to run our 3rd roundtable on care, and we'll have another one on consumer opportunities. Well, people are looking at us to help them develop a longevity strategy for their organization. Obviously, every organization is different. We go very deeply into the data and the projections to help form those strategies. Next, advisory. To help people leverage our extensive network of experts who we bring in to help when specialized input is needed. Accelerating innovation. We're increasingly getting calls from a number of people, at least one of whom is in this room. Can you take a look at what I'm doing? What do you think? What's your reaction? How can we help? We can help with validating, testing concepts, connecting you to networks. And one of the things that we do periodically is sponsor meetups where we deliberately invite a combination of startups and investors. But what's equally important in 2024 is customers. Because if you're a startup and you're looking for investment, you better have paying customers. And I was on an investor call as an investor myself a few hours ago, and that was just reconfirmed. Really looking at scalability and paying customers. And finally, insights. So industry briefings, breakfast, marketing insights, and custom sessions, not unlike this, in-house for your organizations, customized for specifically what your organization does. The longevity economy. We're here to help accelerate innovation that improves the outlook for people who are 45 and older so they can secure the prime of their life.